Have you ever been playing a 2D game and gone, this is good and all, but I wonder what it would be like in 3D? Well, for fans of the roguelike game Cryptark, you get your wish in Gunhead, an FPS roguelike that has you piloting a mech unit, salvaging giant ships of valuable metal and cores, while trying to not blow up from the threats inside. The game costs $19.99 and comes out today, September 8th, 2023, on the PC, specifically Steam. But before I begin this video, this key was obtained from Keymailer for video creation purposes. That won't change my opinion of the game in the end, but you should know that because of FTC guidelines, as well as the whole morals thing, you know? One thing before I begin. This may be a little different from my standard review content, because I've only played about 6 to 8 hours of Gunhead, not completing the game once, getting about 13 to 22 achievements despite getting the key a week or so before launch, hence why this is labeled First Impressions. The reason for that is, well, you could probably tell by my voice, is that I got sick. And well, it's hard to focus on a game that has you killing enemies left and right when your head is pounding and you want to sleep longer than Rip Van Winkle. I may be less structured than my normal reviews, and keep this in mind when it comes to the difficulty discussion and challenge, as I obviously wasn't 100%. So the idea of Gunhead is simple. You're part of a privateering enterprise that boards spaceships that have either become derelict or become overrun with various creatures and hazards. A company of unknown origin will pay you for the cores of these spaceships, and well, how else are you going to make it in this world? Those who have played Cryptark will recognize several of the characters and elements here, as well you should, because this is a sequel to that game in more than one way. In fact, it's pretty much just it in 3D, and more of an FPS roguelike as opposed to a top-down one. But obviously that introduces its own challenges, so let's start with the basics. The start of each run has you choose one of 3 ships to salvage, each having a procedurally generated ship to investigate, with a number of tech systems, drones, sentries, and a main brain/boss objective to complete. On top of that, you'll get 3 different secondary objectives that will range from things like destroying a particular system first to leaving a system running and completing the primary objective. Once you make your choice, you'll make your way to the main airlock and suit up, where over time, you'll get the choice of 6 different suits, some being faster, some having more starting health and equipment. Regardless, you make your choice and start your mission by getting 1 random item and weapon on top of your main equipment, and then you go right at it. Well, not right at it. You're gonna want to plan first. See, unlike some other roguelikes in the genre, Cryptark, and specifically Gunhead, I feel like you need to plan a lot more reasonably before you rush into the level. That's because your objectives are very dependent on the layout of the map. For example, you may have shielding tech systems you have to deal with, which may guard other systems. Most of the time they include the main brain, so you'll have to hit them first before you get the main objective. But you may not want to hit them first. Maybe you'll want to get the destroy 2 systems in 30 seconds objective done before that. And maybe they're too close enough that you'll want to try them out immediately, especially if they're a factory that could make more enemies, or, an alarm system that could cause you more problems. Or hell, maybe you focus on the shuffle module first, as it could ruin your entire plan from the get-go if it mixes things up in the wrong way. Figuring out your plan before you rush in this game is critical, and I should know. When I wasn't paying attention to the objectives and I just started going, I found myself losing on more occasions. More than just, okay, I took a couple more hits. I found myself not completing missions and having to start all over again. I'm not saying that this game is more strategic than reaction. Actually, that's exactly what I'm saying. You can have the best reactions in the entire world. You could be like a jet fighter pilot who has, 100 kills and 0 deaths to them because of their quick reactions. But without the strategy, it won't matter here, because you could end up causing yourself more problems over and over again and getting too many hits, when if you just thought about things a little bit, you could have avoided all that damage. Although it may be, of course, dependent on your loadout. You have 4 weapon slots that can have a variety of weapons, all going into a generic category. You have things like shotguns that are good at close range. You have grenade type weapons that are good for explosive damage and splash damage, and so on and so forth. There's good variation in the 50 or so weapons that you can have, including things like melee weapons and even a shield to guard yourself in. And some of the more unique elements of things like the shotguns, like burst shotguns or even EMP shotguns, also give a little flavor to the ones that are a little bit repetitive. But there is a catch here when it comes to your weaponry, and it actually has something to do with the general control scheme and your mech itself. So of course, being an FPS, your first thought is, well, use the mouse and keyboard, right? Which, well, for the basic controls for movement, they do work. Use the mouse to aim and move around, use the arrow keys for movement, and the spacebar for jumping / putting yourself at the right altitude. I mean, you do have sort of a jetpack for most of the actual mechs that you use. But where that gets a bit weird is when you get to the weapons. See, you have 4 weapon slots, and depending on your loadout, you could be firing all 4 at once. But the default configuration for the weapons include mouse 1 for weapon 1, mouse 2 for weapon 2, and then keyboard keys. Granted, you can rebind them to things like mouse 3 and 4, but then you're hitting all 4 mouse keys at once, and that gets a little bit weird, especially trying to remember which key is which for each weapon in the middle of battle. Which, devs, I would recommend putting the key right next to it on the UI on the main screen. I know it's on sub-screens, but it really would help in that case to know, oh, I need to hit mouse 3. Meanwhile, that configuration is just so well built for a controller with bumpers and triggers naturally. And the layout, when looking at it physically, just actually makes a lot of sense. The top left weapon is your left trigger weapon. Your bottom left is your left bumper, which makes it a lot easier when you have a specific weapon you want to use, say a railgun to make an accurate shot, and you're not guessing if it's a keyboard R or the mouse 3 or 4 that you specifically bound. The controls are ones that you are going to need time and experience with in order to really succeed. It's not like the suit is uncontrollable, but knowing exactly how much thrust to give yourself to put yourself in the right position to fire, while still having inertia play a part, is something that comes in time. In addition, aiming, especially with the different weapon positions, can be something you need to get a feel for, especially with bullet or projectile weapons. It felt to me that I was taking into account the position of the weapon, and the trajectory was slightly altered depending on where it was on the mech, but it also never felt like the crosshair was inherently lying to me. Normally I would have investigated this more thoroughly before doing this review, but, being sick and all. It isn't a deal breaker in either way, it's just something that you'll need to get used to. With that said, even having faster mechs in my arsenal, I found myself taking the way of the tortoise more in the game, going for mechs with higher health or specifically not necessarily as fast, making my movement deliberate and not necessarily slow, but having the ability to dodge on a whim with the B button. Getting too close to enemies usually is a problem in this game, whether it be having no room to dodge multi-element shots, or the bane of my existence in the early game, the saw that charges at you. Even with a melee weapon that can give bursts of distance at times, I found myself always wanting to start combat at mid-range, and it was effective once I learned the game's tricks, with a few exceptions, like the shield enemies. But let's hit the big thing right now, because there is one thing that you'll need to get a hold of with this game, and for some people, this may be a problem. The biggest tool in your arsenal is the radar, and that's something that I'm still going back and forth on when it comes to the implementation, even as I finish up this review. Yes, I know, many games have radar. How is this different? Well, the radar is key to the success here, because quite frankly, without it, you'll get snuck up on and take damage a couple of times, and that starts to add up over time. The sound design doesn't feel impactful enough to really pinpoint where creatures were at any time. And considering that you could have several around you, and that would basically be ringing in your ears in more crowded areas, I sorta understand it to a certain extent. In addition, with the coloring and themes of derelict and rusted ships happening, many of the enemies will start to blend into the background and will be highlighted if you position over them, but not to a point where it's instantly obvious. But that blending idea and camouflage also goes somewhat for the radar as well. Sometimes the enemies show up as gray dots against the blackish background. Harder enemies can be a skull or a specific icon, but for normal enemies, you have to squint to really see them coming at times, which again feels purposeful. Like the mech isn't the top of the line one, and thus you're working with what you've got. But it also really caused me headaches, as there would be periods of hyper focus on the radar, wondering if I missed something when I got snuck up on. In addition, the 3D element doesn't necessarily tell you if they are above or below, and that can lead to more problems, especially where the radar is. Yes, it's in the corner out of the way, sort of, but part of me wants it in the middle bottom, because of the fact that I need to keep on looking at it, and going to that one corner, especially if the action's on the left, yeah, that's a little bit of an issue at times. So why am I going back and forth on it? Well, the thing is, when I look at the restrictions on the different elements in the game, how much you can move with the default jetpack before having to recharge, the types of options you get in terms of the objectives you have, they start to add up in terms of making a challenge that not only feels doable, but not exploitable. The game feels like it went through the paces of not making any one thing too powerful without having an obvious weakness. Sure, explosive weapons can be great in the game in one-shotting things, but if you get into a corridor with tight spaces to move, you're going to do damage to yourself. It's that balance that reminded me of why I loved Cryptark so much. It didn't feel overbearing in difficulty, but it didn't feel like I could pull the mask over the game's eyes. And that's where I love this game in the big picture. Was I recognizing parts of the procedural generation in the 20th and 25th runs? Yeah, but the configurations still made a difference, and I had to keep adjusting to the circumstances ahead of me. It didn't really matter that I was recognizing them again, because I was still having fun, even at the 10-hour mark that I'm at now. I'm really still enjoying the game and want to complete a full run, and that's a sign of a good roguelike. Even if there's a few things I do want to point out for the devs, as I do think the game can take one more big step in terms of splash. The big one is, devs, I do question giving you the ability to swap out weapons on the fly. The fact is, I feel like the extra challenge of having to manage your inventory while in the ship, and maybe allowing weapon swap outs back at the main base, would have added an extra challenge to the overall picture, maybe even on the hard difficulty. Sure, if I find a weapon, allowing me to install it right away makes sense, but the idea of having to make a choice about keeping the limited weapon ammo of a railgun, which I know will insta-shot enemies but only has 10 shots left, versus the 1,000 bullet machine gun that is more slow and steady, would have added a layer of strategy that I really think would have been worth it. The fact is, I don't have to really worry about that right now. I could just go into the menu and change it even in mid-battle. And not to say that every boss fight is like this, but I found myself just underwhelmed at the bosses in general. I actually think some of the defense of the actual tech areas are harder than the bosses with the arenas that are given. I don't know what it is exactly. I did die on a boss or two, but frankly, I also didn't fear them, as I felt they were too easy to tear through, especially if you had 4 good weapons on you. In the end though, I really enjoyed Gunhead, and will play it more when I have the chance. It's the kind of game I think certain players will love. Smart strategic gameplay with movement and weaponry that aren't too strong, but aren't weak either, but focus on you making smart decisions. Runs can end easily if you're not careful, but you're rewarded if you think about them. And the visuals are good, not great, and I wish certain elements were better in the sound design department. But I had fun, and that's what I will keep on pushing with this game. Yeah, it's got some problems, but it's fun, and worth your time, coming in at an 86 out of 100, making it a solid buy, unless you're hurting for cash. But that does not take into account my enhancer system, which takes the more subjective elements of games and tries to match a game to you. If you fall into one of the following categories on screen, add or subtract that score to the main score. If the first digit of your score changes, refer to this chart to see if the score lies in the buyability rating for you. And in this case, you can see that certain players are going to really enjoy this and others maybe not so much. Hence the point of the enhancer system. Anyway, that's it for this review. I do want to apologize for not being able to do my usual rigmarole when it comes to reviewing a game. I did what I could here. It may feel a little bit unstructured and a little bit weird because I'm missing certain elements like, you know, the music and things like that. But I did what I could, and I wanted to focus on the gameplay because I think the gameplay is really good when it comes to the strategy action element. Now, if you do have comments for this review, leave them in the comments section below. And if you want to talk more about the game, or maybe want to see more of it, head over to the Discord, which is, of course, in the description below. I will probably be getting back to the Inescapable review, but I also know that there are a couple games coming up that I'm interested in. I know that the Mamaya final part is coming. I may not necessarily do a video on that. We'll see. Mamaya is one of my favorite visual novels, and the fact is that I really want to see what they add to it. I'm also got Tevi coming November 29th. I'm assuming I'm getting a key for that, considering I got a preview key, and considering how much I love the preview. Yeah, I'm going to cover that game. But if you want updates, the Discord. Anyway, that's it for now, and I am going to just drink a bunch of tea, coffee, or whatever to help my throat. Later. And keep on gaming.